Welcome to True Echo, where real stories, raw emotions, and hidden truths come alive. Today's story will shock you, move you, and leave you questioning how deep loyalty and corruption can run. This isn't just a story about a funeral, a loyal dog, and a police department. It's a story about survival against the odds, courage in the face of betrayal, and one dog's refusal to let justice be buried. Stay with us, because what you're about to hear will change everything you thought you knew. Morning light streamed through the old frosted windows of Wellington & Sons funeral home, casting soft gold across the rows of black-clad mourners. The room was heavy with silence, broken only by the creak of floorboards under polished shoes and the occasional muffled sniffle. At the center, an oak coffin sat elevated on a dais, draped with a navy cloth embroidered with a gleaming police badge. It was supposed to be a final tribute to Captain Gregor Addison, the storied and beloved head of the Rosebridge Police Department. Detective Jonah Highland stood toward the back, his tall frame rigid, clutching his hat against his chest with one hand, the leash of his partner, Ranger, in the other. Ranger, a lean, sharp-eyed German shepherd, quivered restlessly. His dark gaze was locked onto the coffin with an intensity that made Jonah uneasy. He gave a gentle tug on the leash, whispering, "Easy, boy." But Ranger wasn't listening. Instead, a sharp bark tore through the stillness, cutting across the room like a whip crack. All heads turned. The mourners, a sea of officers in gleaming dress uniforms, city officials, and somber-faced civilians, stared with a mix of shock and irritation. Near the coffin, Harriet Addison, Gregor's widow, flinched and clutched her hands to her chest. Deputy Chief Ray Burnham, a tall man with silver hair and a reputation for being as cold as he was commanding, snapped his gaze toward Jonah. "Detective Highland, control that animal. This is a memorial service, not a circus." Jonah muttered an apology, tugging harder on the leash. But Ranger strained forward, barking again, this time more urgently. His hackles rose, teeth bared not in aggression but in warning. Jonah had seen this behavior before, not in grief but when the dog detected something wrong. Something dangerous. The pastor faltered mid-prayer, glancing nervously at the coffin. The tension in the room was electric, a powder keg waiting for a spark. Harriet Addison, tears staining her cheeks, looked desperately at Jonah, silently pleading for an explanation he didn't have. Ranger suddenly lunged, nearly ripping the leash from Jonah's grip. With a leap, the dog vaulted onto the dais, pawing frantically at the coffin. Gasps erupted. Someone shouted. Harriet staggered backward, clutching her mouth in horror. Burnham stormed forward, fury flashing in his eyes. "Enough. Remove that dog before I have him taken down." Jonah's gut twisted. Every fiber of his being screamed that something was wrong, terribly wrong. Summoning every ounce of courage, he raised his voice over the chaos. "Wait. Open the coffin." The room fell into stunned silence. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Deputy Chief Burnham's face turned beet red. "That's out of the question," he bellowed. But Harriet, pale and trembling, stepped forward. Her voice cracked but carried enough force to silence the murmurs. "Open it. Please, open it." The funeral director, his face ashen, hesitated only a moment before nodding. Two attendants moved to the coffin, hands shaking as they unlatched the lid. The polished wood creaked ominously as it was slowly lifted. Jonah's heart hammered in his chest. Ranger barked and whined frantically, clawing at the base of the coffin. Harriet let out a strangled cry, somewhere between a sob and a scream, as the contents were revealed. Inside the coffin, Captain Gregor Addison lay immaculately dressed in his blue uniform, hands folded over his chest, and breathing. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. Then chaos erupted. Someone screamed. A woman fainted, collapsing into the arms of a nearby officer. Phones clattered to the ground. Jonah barely heard the pastor's Bible hit the floor with a dull thud over the roaring in his ears. Harriet stumbled forward, reaching trembling fingers toward her husband's wrist, where a faint but unmistakable pulse beat against her touch. "He's alive," she sobbed, collapsing against the coffin. "Oh my God, he's alive." Burnham staggered back, his face blanching to a sickly white. Jonah barked into his radio, "Call an ambulance. Now." The room exploded into frantic motion. Officers rushed outside, barking into radios. The funeral home staff scrambled, knocking over floral arrangements in their panic. Ranger stood at attention by the coffin, tail low but wagging slightly, his mission accomplished. As paramedics barreled in minutes later, Jonah stood rooted, staring at the impossible sight before him. Gregor Addison was not dead. But he had been placed in that coffin anyway. And the grim, gnawing certainty lodged in Jonah's gut whispered the truth no one else seemed ready to voice yet. This wasn't a mistake. It was a crime. And whoever had orchestrated it was still out there, and very, very dangerous. The shriek of sirens shattered the funeral home's uneasy silence as paramedics rushed Captain Addison onto a stretcher, oxygen mask strapped hastily over his face. Harriet clung to the stretcher's edge, her sobs raw and uncontrolled now as she stumbled alongside them. Jonah hovered close, unable to shake the churning storm inside him. Ranger stayed glued to his side, his body tense, alert to every shift in the electric air. Outside, the small gathering of mourners had erupted into a scene of confusion and disbelief. Uniformed officers barked commands, trying to establish a perimeter. Some in the crowd clutched their heads, others frantically dialed numbers, relaying the surreal turn of events to stunned family and colleagues. Across the parking lot, Deputy Chief Burnham barked into his phone, his face locked in a stony, unreadable expression. Jonah didn't like it. Burnham's reaction wasn't relief, wasn't shock, it was calculation. As the ambulance roared off toward Rosebridge Central Hospital, Jonah pulled out his own phone, calling in a favor to get internal affairs on high alert. If someone had orchestrated Addison's premature burial, it meant they had power, access, and absolute confidence no one would question it. Addison's survival was a wrench in a machine that had expected a clean, silent elimination. Jonah turned, catching Burnham's gaze across the lot. For a long moment, neither moved. Burnham narrowed his eyes slightly, then strode toward Jonah with the same predatory ease of a shark gliding toward blood. "Detective Highland," Burnham said, his voice low, "you just threw this department into a circus. You better have something solid to back up why you interrupted a state-sanctioned funeral." Jonah fought the surge of anger rising in his throat. Ranger smelled something wrong. "You saved a life. That's solid enough for me." Burnham's mouth tightened. He leaned closer, his words barely above a whisper. "From this moment forward, Highland, you don't make a move without reporting to me. Understood?" Jonah smiled thinly. "Understood, sir." It was a lie. There was no way he was trusting Burnham now, not after Addison's frantic behavior before his collapse. Not after Addison's whispered concerns about corruption in the department. Burnham turned away, barking orders at the forensic team that had arrived to sweep the scene. Jonah watched him go, filing the interaction away. Something stank, and it wasn't just the rushed funeral. Ranger whined low in his throat. Jonah patted the dog's side reassuringly. "I know, buddy," he murmured. "I feel it too." Jonah made his way to his unmarked car, Ranger leaping gracefully into the passenger seat. As he slid behind the wheel, Jonah's mind spun in circles. Addison's mysterious investigation. The sudden death declaration. The insistence on a quick funeral without an autopsy. And now Burnham's aggressive attempt to reassert control. It wasn't coincidence. It was conspiracy. And it wasn't just Addison who was in danger anymore. At the hospital, Jonah was waved through to the critical care unit after flashing his badge. The sterile hallways buzzed with quiet tension as nurses hurried past, for bags swinging, phones chirping. Harriet sat slumped in a plastic chair outside the ICU, her head buried in her hands. When she looked up at Jonah's approach, her eyes were raw, almost feral with grief and guilt. "He's alive," she whispered again as if she still didn't quite believe it. Jonah knelt beside her, keeping his voice low. "Harriet, listen to me carefully. This wasn't an accident. Someone tried to bury him. Alive." Her face crumpled. "Why, Jonah? Gregor, he lived for this city. He fought for it." Jonah glanced toward the ICU door, guarded by 2 uniformed officers. "That's exactly why," he said. "He found something. Something someone powerful wanted buried with him." Before Harriet could respond, Dr. Felicity Kararma, the hospital's chief toxicologist, approached, her face grave. She held a clipboard in one hand, but her attention was laser-focused on Harriet and Jonah. "We have preliminary toxicology results," she said, glancing around and lowering her voice. "Captain Addison's blood contains traces of a synthesized compound designed to mimic death. Drops heart rate, suppresses breathing, even lowers body temperature." Harriet's hand flew to her mouth. Jonah leaned forward. "Can you tell if it was deliberate?" Kararma's mouth was a grim line. "This isn't something you stumble across by accident. This compound isn't commercially available. Someone created it, someone with serious resources." Jonah absorbed that, a knot tightening in his chest. "How long has it been in his system?" "We estimate microdoses were administered over several days, culminating in a final dose that induced the death-like state just before he was declared dead." Harriet shook her head violently. I found him on the couch. I thought he was gone. I called 911. They said, heart attack. Jonah placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. You did everything right, Harriet. This wasn't your fault. Kararma hesitated, then added, the funeral preparations were rushed. No autopsy. That's highly irregular for a high-profile figure like a police captain. Jonah's mind raced. Whoever orchestrated this had influence, enough to push through procedures, bypass standard checks, and seal a coffin over a breathing man. He squeezed Harriet's hand gently. I need you to think. Before Gregor collapsed, was he acting strange? Paranoid? Worried? Harriet wiped at her face, thinking hard. He was stressed. He said he was working on something big. Something dangerous. He wouldn't tell me details. Just that he was close to exposing something rotten. Jonah's pulse quickened. Addison had discovered a rot so deep, it had almost claimed his life. Not almost, Jonah corrected himself grimly. Still might. If the people behind this found out Addison survived, they wouldn't make the same mistake twice. Jonah stood, heart pounding. He had to move fast. Had to find out who was behind this, and why. Because one thing was absolutely clear. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. Jonah stepped out into the cool hospital night, the doors sliding closed behind him with a soft hiss. Ranger padded faithfully beside him, glancing up as if reading Jonah's roiling thoughts. Overhead, the streetlights painted long shadows across the pavement. Jonah tugged his jacket tighter against the creeping chill and pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts until he found the number he needed. Sergeant Kiera Bishop answered after 2 rings, her voice crisp despite the hour. Highland? What's wrong? I need you to pull everything you can on Captain Addison's last investigations, Jonah said, keeping his voice low. Whatever he was working on, whoever he was meeting. I don't care how deep you have to dig. There was a pause, then Bishop responded, cautious. This about what happened at the funeral? Jonah exhaled sharply, glancing back toward the glowing hospital windows. Addison didn't die of a heart attack, Kiera. Someone tried to bury him alive. We're sitting on a powder keg. I'm on it, Bishop said immediately. I'll start with his email and personnel records. Discreetly. Thanks, Jonah said, ending the call. He ruffled Ranger's ears, the dog leaning into the touch. Let's go, boy. We've got work to do. The drive back to Jonah's apartment was short but tense. Every time headlights approached from behind, Jonah's muscles stiffened, waiting for the flash of gunfire or the screech of tires. Paranoia was a survival instinct he had never fully shed since his days overseas, and tonight it felt more like prophecy. At home, Jonah sat up at his battered dining table, spreading out everything he knew. He scribbled notes, arrows pointing from Burnham's name to Commissioner Dallas Wynn, then to a list of suspected shell companies and a barely legible scrawl from Addison's day planner. Thursday. Confirm. Ranger circled once, then lay down at Jonah's feet, his head resting heavily on his paws. His presence, steady and patient, grounded Jonah more than he realized. Hours passed. Files blinked onto Jonah's laptop screen. Bishop had started sending encrypted records. Expense reports. Meeting notes. Internal memos. Most of it routine, except for a series of flagged expenditures approved by Wynn's office, rerouted through obscure charities and urban renewal initiatives. It didn't scream corruption, but it whispered. And in Jonah's experience, whispers were more dangerous than screams. At 2:03 a.m. Jonah's phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. Unknown, stop digging Highland. Final warning. Jonah's hand tightened around the phone until his knuckles whitened. He looked at Ranger, who met his gaze with a steady, unblinking loyalty. Let them watch, Jonah muttered under his breath. They're about to see the whole damn thing unravel. He leaned back, piecing together the pattern. Addison had found something, all right. Something big enough to scare people who thought they owned the city. He thought of Harriet's haunted face. Of Addison's still, fragile form lying helpless in that hospital bed. And he made a silent vow. He wouldn't let the people responsible for this walk free. Not without a fight. The next morning broke gray and damp, a thick mist clinging to the city streets. Jonah hadn't slept. He gulped down bitter coffee and rubbed a hand over his stubble, mind still racing as he packed up his files. He and Ranger drove to the Rosebridge Police Department, slipping through the side entrance. The main lobby buzzed with nervous energy. News of Addison's survival had leaked despite Burnham's efforts to contain it, and rumors swirled like a storm brewing over the station. Jonah pushed through to the crime lab, where Sergeant Bishop greeted him with a grim nod. I cross-referenced Addison's files, she said, dropping a thick folder onto the table. It's not just shell companies. It's procurement contracts, police supply kickbacks, city council bribes. Wynn's name shows up everywhere, always a step removed, but it's there. Jonah flipped through the pages, his stomach sinking. Enough for a case? Enough for suspicion, Bishop said. But hard evidence? That's buried deep. Addison must have been close to finding it. Jonah's eyes caught on a familiar scribble, OPG Guardian, the same project Addison had flagged in his planner. What's this? He asked, pointing. Bishop shrugged. Some urban redevelopment initiative Wynn's been championing. Supposedly revitalizing the riverside docks. Millions of dollars funneled through it, no oversight. Jonah stared at the words. Orion Project Guardian, he muttered. OPG. A sudden memory surfaced, Addison mentioning OPG in passing, a glint of worry in his eyes. Jonah hadn't thought anything of it then. He cursed himself for not asking more questions. Bishop tapped the folder. And get this, there's a warehouse listed as a shipping hub for the project. Out by the old steel yard. Jonah's pulse quickened. The same steel yard where Addison had scheduled that secret meeting. Someone tried to kill Addison before he could get there, he said, more to himself than to Bishop. Bishop's voice dropped to a near whisper. Be careful, Highland. If you push too hard, too fast. I know, Jonah said, grabbing the folder and standing. That's why I'm not pushing. He was blowing the whole damn wall down. Before leaving, he slipped the documents into an evidence bag and tucked it under his jacket. Ranger trotted faithfully at his heels. Out in the parking lot, Jonah paused, scanning the horizon. Rain threatened in the heavy clouds, and something darker stirred beneath the surface of the city. The corruption Addison had unearthed wasn't just a dirty secret. It was a disease. And Jonah could feel it pulsing in the pavement, breathing through the cracks. He wasn't just fighting for Addison anymore. He was fighting for the soul of the city itself. By noon, Jonah had secured a safe location for Eli Rohr, the whistleblower Addison had been working with, and moved to secure Addison's evidence independently of the department. He couldn't trust the chain of command. Not now. Not with Burnham breathing down his neck and Wynn's influence bleeding into every corner of Rosebridge. As Jonah headed back to the hospital to check on Addison, his phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. This time no words. Just a picture. A shot of Jonah's apartment window, with a red crosshair drawn digitally over it. Jonah's jaw clenched. Cowards, he muttered. Beside him, Ranger growled low, his body stiffening. Yeah, I know, Jonah said. They're getting desperate. Which meant he was getting close. Damn close. The corridors of Rosebridge Central Hospital buzzed with the quiet urgency of everyday crises. Jonah walked them slowly, methodically, the evidence bag tucked securely under his jacket, Ranger trotting at his side. Every footstep echoed louder than it should have, and every nurse's glance felt edged with suspicion. Paranoia? Maybe. But Jonah trusted his instincts. They'd saved his life too many times to ignore. He paused at the door to Captain Addison's ICU room. Through the window, he could see Harriet sitting beside the bed, holding Gregor's hand, murmuring softly. Machines beeped and clicked steadily, filling the space between them with a strange kind of hope. Addison's chest rose and fell, labored but steady. Jonah knocked gently before stepping inside. Harriet looked up, exhaustion painting every line of her face. He's awake on and off, she whispered. The doctors say, it's a good sign. Jonah approached quietly. Addison's eyes fluttered open, glassy but aware. He managed a faint, strained smile when he saw Jonah and Ranger. Hey Cap, Jonah said, pulling up a chair. Looks like you picked a hell of a time to nap. A raspy chuckle escaped Addison's cracked lips. Couldn't miss the fireworks, he croaked. Harriet squeezed his hand, tears brimming again. Jonah leaned in, lowering his voice. Gregor, you were set up. They tried to bury you. Burnham. When? Maybe more. At the sound of Burnham's name, a shadow flickered across Addison's battered face. His fingers twitched weakly. Burnham? He whispered. Trusted him. Jonah clenched his fists under the table. We have proof. Not everything yet, but enough. You just hang on, Captain. We're going to finish this. Addison's eyes closed for a moment, but a ghost of a smile lingered. A kind of peace. Harriet wiped his forehead with a damp cloth, her hands trembling. Just then Dr. Kararma entered, her white coat fluttering. She smiled tightly. He's stable for now, but his system's still fragile. Keep the stress minimal. Jonah nodded, rising to his feet. "We'll be back soon, sir," he said quietly to Addison. "Rest up. We're going to need your testimony." Outside the room, Jonah pulled Harriet aside. "We're moving tonight," he said under his breath. "We're going after Wynn's operation at the shipping yard." Harriet paled. "Jonah, please, be careful." He nodded grimly. "I have a team from outside the city. People I trust. If we're right, we'll have enough evidence to blow this open. Real evidence. No way to bury it this time." Harriet clutched his sleeve. "If you can't do it alone, don't die trying." Jonah smiled sadly. "I've got Ranger. I'm not alone." And then he was gone, striding back into the misty gray afternoon, determination burning through his exhaustion. Hours later, just before midnight, the shipping yard crouched under the weight of thick, low-hanging clouds. Rusted cranes loomed like skeletons against the night sky. Dim floodlights buzzed over rows of stacked containers, their surfaces slick with mist. Jonah crouched behind an abandoned forklift, binoculars pressed to his eyes. Ranger stayed low beside him, every muscle taut with anticipation. He watched as two black SUVs rolled through the south gate. Armed men spilled out, security contractors dressed in tactical gear, moving with military precision. In their midst, crates being unloaded from an unmarked truck. Jonah's blood ran cold. He recognized the logos, shell companies tied to Wynn's fraudulent urban renewal projects. And standing near the truck, barking orders? Deputy Chief Ray Burnham. It was like a punch to the gut. Concrete proof of betrayal. Jonah whispered into his earpiece. "Targets confirmed. Crates are being moved. Burnham's here." Across the yard, Lieutenant Shelby Vargas responded. "Copy. Hold positions. Wait for my signal." Jonah lowered the binoculars, heart hammering. He looked at Ranger. "You ready, boy?" The dog wagged his tail once, low and slow, locked in, focused. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught Jonah's eye. A shadow slipping along the catwalk above the yard. Watching. Waiting. He didn't have time to wonder who it was. Shelby's voice crackled in his ear. "Go." Jonah and Ranger moved as one. He broke from cover, weapon raised. "Police. Drop your weapons. Hands where I can see them." The yard exploded into chaos. Gunfire barked into the night, bullets ricocheting off steel. Jonah dove behind a shipping container, returning fire. Ranger darted expertly through the melee, herding men toward Jonah's line of fire, keeping them off balance. From the catwalk above, a hidden shooter opened up. Jonah felt a bullet zip past his ear. He rolled into cover, heart pounding. Over the radio, Shelby's team engaged, sweeping in from the north and east. The firefight was brutal, fast. Within minutes, the contractors surrendered, those still able to stand. But Burnham was gone. Vanished into the maze of containers. Jonah sprinted toward the last place he'd seen him, Ranger at his side, feet pounding over wet concrete. Every step was a prayer. And then he saw it, a flash of movement by the docks. Burnham, dragging a heavy duffel bag toward a waiting boat. "Burnham!" Jonah roared. "Don't run." Burnham spun, gun raised. Jonah dove aside as a shot rang out, the bullet punching into the crate behind him. He returned fire, a warning shot that cracked inches from Burnham's feet. "You're done." Jonah shouted. "Drop it." Burnham hesitated. Then, impossibly, he smiled, a cold, cruel thing, and hurled the duffel into the river. The splash echoed through the silent yard. Jonah charged, tackling Burnham to the ground. Ranger latched onto Burnham's arm, holding him pinned without drawing blood. "You stupid fool," Burnham hissed. "You think this changes anything? Wynn owns this city." "Not anymore," Jonah growled, slapping the cuffs onto him. "You're done." "He's done. You buried the wrong man." Behind him, Shelby's team secured the yard. Crates filled with illegal drugs. Financial records. Weapon shipments disguised as construction materials. Evidence. Irrefutable. Jonah dragged Burnham to his feet, ignoring the man's muttered curses. Somewhere overhead, the first drops of rain began to fall. It was over. Almost. The rain fell harder as Jonah hauled Burnham through the soaked shipping yard, water splashing around their feet. Ranger kept pace, his sharp eyes never leaving their prisoner. Burnham stumbled, but Jonah gave him no mercy, tightening his grip on the cuffs. Behind them, Shelby Vargas's team moved efficiently, zip-tying the subdued security contractors and documenting the evidence. Crates cracked open revealed canisters of synthetic toxins, stacks of laundered cash, and files linking shipments directly to City Hall initiatives. Wynn's dirty empire laid bare under the flickering floodlights. As Jonah shoved Burnham toward the back of an unmarked van, he caught the flash of headlights across the yard's far end. A dark SUV idled there, its windows tinted black, engine growling low. Jonah stiffened. He knew instinctively, even from across the muddy yard, that Dallas Wynn was inside, watching. Wynn didn't need to get his hands dirty. He had pawns like Burnham for that. And when pawns fell, Wynn simply moved new ones into place. Burnham sneered over his shoulder. You think parading me around in cuffs will matter? You think anyone will touch him? He's got judges, politicians, federal friends. Jonah slammed the van door shut, cutting off Burnham's voice. He leaned his forehead briefly against the cool metal, fighting the exhaustion threatening to drown him. Detective, Shelby Vargas called over the rain, approaching briskly. We've got everything secured. My people are already transmitting evidence copies to the federal task force. Jonah straightened, nodding. Good. Keep Burnham isolated. No calls. No visitors. Not even his lawyer until we've processed everything. Shelby smirked slightly. You think his lawyer will get past my boys? Jonah allowed a flicker of a smile. For the first time in days he felt a sliver of hope. Across the yard, the SUV began to pull away, tires crunching over gravel. Jonah watched it go, rage simmering under his skin. Not yet. He wasn't done yet. By dawn, Jonah was back at the hospital. He hadn't even stopped to change out of his rain-soaked clothes. He didn't care. All that mattered was Captain Addison. He found Harriet dozing in a chair by the ICU window, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Inside the room, Addison lay still but breathing stronger, color returning to his face. Jonah tapped gently on the glass. Harriet stirred, blinking sleepily. She opened the door a crack. Jonah? He smiled wearily. We did it. We got Burnham. We got evidence. It's not over yet, but it's a damn good start. Harriet's hands flew to her mouth as tears flooded her eyes. For a moment she said nothing, just stared at him like he had pulled the sun out of the sky. Jonah stepped inside, taking in Addison's sleeping form. I wish he could see it, Harriet whispered. He will, Jonah said firmly. And when he does, he'll know the city's still worth fighting for. Harriet nodded, tears streaming freely now. Across the room, Ranger padded quietly to the foot of Addison's bed, resting his chin on the mattress, standing silent vigil. Later that afternoon, Jonah found himself sitting across from Special Agent Laura Patel, one of the feds assigned to the corruption task force. She reviewed the files Shelby's team had secured, her dark brows drawing together with every passing minute. This is incredible, she muttered finally. Supply chain fraud, racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder. You've handed us a gold mine. Jonah leaned forward. It's not enough. Wynn will try to spin it, muddy it, tie it up in court for years if we let him. Patel nodded. That's why we're moving fast. With Burnham's arrest and the evidence from the yard, we're drafting warrants now. We're freezing Wynn's accounts today. And Roar? Jonah asked. Eli Roar is safe, Patel confirmed. We've moved him to a federal safe house. His testimony will be critical. Jonah exhaled slowly, tension bleeding from his muscles. Progress. Real progress. But still, it wasn't over. Not until Dallas Wynn was wearing cuffs of his own. Patel closed the folder and studied him. You and your dog, you saved that captain's life. You saved this case. Jonah glanced at Ranger, who lounged beside his chair, ears flicking at the sound of his name. He's the real hero, Jonah said, meaning every word. Patel smiled slightly. Then maybe you should both be there when we bring Wynn down. Jonah's blood stirred at the thought. Count us in, he said. Meanwhile, across town, Dallas Wynn sat in his glass-walled office at City Hall, staring out over Rosebridge as storm clouds gathered again. His phone buzzed. He answered curtly. They have Burnham, a voice on the other end said. Wynn's jaw tensed. He drummed his fingers against the polished desk. And the cargo? Gone, the voice said. Seized by Highland and his team. Wynn's knuckles whitened around the phone. Then it's time, he said coldly. Plan B. He ended the call and turned back toward the window, watching the city he had ruled for so long. If Jonah Highland thought the game was over, he was dead wrong. The tension in Rosebridge felt like static clinging to every brick and lamppost. News of Burnham's arrest had leaked despite efforts to contain it, and whispers turned to shouts on the evening news. Reporters swarmed City Hall. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse. But Commissioner Dallas Wynn? Still untouched. Still smiling that perfect politician's smile, dripping sympathy, offering statements about rogue actors and isolated incidents, while quietly maneuvering his defenses. Jonah watched it unfold from the battered break room TV at the precinct, his stomach roiling. Ranger sat by his boots, head tilted, sensing Jonah's simmering anger. Sergeant Bishop burst through the door, laptop in hand. She looked grim but electric with urgency. "We found it," she said, slapping down her computer. "The missing link." Jonah leaned in. The screen showed encrypted communications, emails routed through dummy accounts. Detailed shipment orders, payouts, bribes, and clear signatures from Wynn himself. "This ties Wynn directly to the synthetic toxin used on Addison," Bishop said, voice low. "We even have the offshore accounts where the laundered funds were stashed." Jonah exhaled sharply. "That's it. That's enough." "There's more," Bishop said. "Our friends at the FBI got a warrant for Wynn's home and office. They're moving in tonight." Jonah stood, adrenaline burning through him. "I want to be there." Bishop hesitated. "It's risky. Wynn's desperate. He might fight." "All the more reason," Jonah said, already grabbing his jacket. "He started this. I want to be there when it ends." Outside, as he slid behind the wheel of his sedan, Ranger jumped in beside him, tail wagging once. "Yeah, buddy," Jonah said, ruffling his fur. "Time to finish what we started." City Hall stood bathed in harsh floodlights as federal agents swarmed its marble steps. Media vans lined the street, satellite dishes spinning like vultures circling a fresh kill. Jonah parked a block away, blending into the crowd of onlookers. Ranger at his heel, he cut through the flashing cameras and shouting reporters. Inside the grand lobby, federal agents flanked the elevators. FBI Special Agent Patel met him near the entrance, her face tight. "You're just in time," she said. "We're executing simultaneous warrants, home and office." Jonah nodded grimly. "Where's Wynn?" Patel's lips pressed thin. "Penthouse floor. He's been stalling, claiming he needs time to gather documents." Jonah's gut twisted. Stall tactics. Buying time for something. He didn't like it. Not one bit. "I'm going up," he said. Patel hesitated. "We can't guarantee." "Then don't guarantee it," Jonah cut in. "Just cover me." He moved before she could argue, Ranger trotting silently beside him into the elevator. The ride up was agonizing. Each ding of a passing floor louder than the last. Jonah checked his weapon, heart hammering in his ears. When the doors slid open onto the penthouse floor, the scene was eerie, quiet, too quiet. No aides bustling. No security guards stationed. Just a long, polished hallway leading to Wynn's office. Jonah moved carefully, every step measured. Ranger stayed low, ears flat against his head, muscles taut. He pushed open the door, and found Dallas Wynn standing behind his massive mahogany desk, hands clasped loosely behind his back. As if he were waiting for an appointment. "Detective Highland," Wynn said smoothly, his voice oozing charm. "What an unexpected pleasure." Jonah kept his gun low but ready. "Hands where I can see them, Wynn." Wynn smiled. "Is that any way to greet a public servant?" Jonah advanced a step. "You're not a public servant anymore. You're a criminal. And we have everything we need to prove it." Wynn's expression flickered, just for a second, then hardened into something colder. "You really think this ends with me in cuffs?" he said softly. "You think the city will survive tearing down everything I've built?" Jonah's jaw clenched. "The city will survive because you're going down. Not in spite of it." For a moment, silence crackled between them. Then, in a blur, Wynn lunged, not for Jonah but for something under his desk. Jonah fired instinctively, the shot blasting into the wood an inch from Wynn's hand. Ranger barked, leaping forward to snap his jaws inches from Wynn's arm, forcing him back. Wynn froze, breathing heavily, hands raised at last. Jonah moved fast, kicking aside the hidden gun Wynn had been reaching for. He yanked Wynn's arms behind him and slapped on the cuffs with brutal efficiency. "You're done," Jonah hissed in his ear. "You're going to rot in a cell and no one's coming to save you." Outside the office, agents poured in, their weapons raised, but they found Jonah already standing over a subdued Wynn, Ranger growling softly at his side. The flashbulbs of waiting cameras caught everything as Wynn was led away, the untouchable commissioner, now just another crook in cuffs. The cheers from the gathering crowd outside rang through the marble halls. Hours later, back at the hospital, Jonah stood by Addison's bedside, telling him everything. Harriet sat nearby, eyes wide, hands clutching Addison's. "They got him, Cap," Jonah said. "Burn him too." The whole operation's exposed. Addison's face was pale, but his eyes gleamed with pride, and something else. Oh, you did good, son, Addison whispered, voice cracking. Jonah blinked hard against the burn behind his eyes. We did good, sir. We all did. At the foot of the bed, Ranger wagged his tail softly, resting his chin on Addison's knee. The storm that had threatened to swallow Rosebridge had passed. But the fight for its soul, for justice, had left scars that would take time to heal. And yet, standing there, Jonah believed for the first time in a long time. They could heal. They would heal. Together. The sun rose over Rosebridge like a slow exhale after a long-held breath, gilding the battered city in warm, tentative gold. For the first time in months, the streets felt lighter. Cleaner. Dallas Wynn was behind bars awaiting trial. Ray Burnham had flipped under federal pressure, turning state's witness. And Captain Gregor Addison, the man they all thought they had lost, was slowly, stubbornly reclaiming his life. Jonah sat outside the hospital that morning, Ranger stretched at his feet, watching the city wake up. Car horns blared, coffee shops flickered to life, joggers weaved between morning commuters. Ordinary life, beautiful in its simplicity. Sergeant Bishop slid into the seat beside him, 2 steaming coffees in hand. She passed him one without a word. They sat there for a moment, sipping in silence, the enormity of what they had survived settling between them. You think he'll run for mayor? Bishop asked suddenly, nodding toward the hospital. Jonah chuckled, shaking his head. He'll probably run from the paperwork before he does that. They both laughed, a short, honest sound. For a few precious seconds, it almost felt normal again. Almost. Because even with Wynn gone, the scars he had left would linger. Public trust shattered. Entire divisions of the police department gutted and rebuilt. Community leaders stepping carefully over the smoking ruins of Wynn's once untouchable empire. But Jonah believed in the city's resilience. He had seen it firsthand, in Harriet's tears, in Addison's cracked smile, in the way ordinary people showed up day after day despite the rot that had festered beneath their feet. How's Addison today? Bishop asked. Better, Jonah said. He's up. Walking with help. Doc says he'll make a full recovery eventually. Bishop smiled faintly. Tough old man. Jonah glanced down at Ranger, who had dozed off in the patch of sunlight warming the pavement. Tough old man, and one hell of a good dog. Bishop leaned back in her chair. You ever think about taking a promotion? Jonah raised an eyebrow. I thought we were enjoying the peace while it lasts. She shrugged. Word around the station is they want you running the K9 division. Maybe more. Jonah smiled quietly to himself. He hadn't asked for recognition. Hadn't wanted medals or speeches. All he had wanted was the truth to come out. For Addison to live. For Rosebridge to have a chance at redemption. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. He tossed the empty coffee cup into a nearby trash can and stood, stretching the stiffness from his back. Come on, boy, he said to Ranger, who yawned and scrambled to his feet. Bishop looked up. Where you headed? Jonah grinned. To check on my captain. And without waiting for a reply, he strode across the lot, the morning sun casting long, golden shadows behind him. Inside the hospital room, Addison was sitting upright, a worn paperback novel open in his lap. Harriet hovered nearby, straightening the blankets like a mother fussing over her child. When Addison saw Jonah and Ranger enter, his face lit up with a warmth that cut straight through Jonah's chest. Detective Highland, Addison said hoarsely. Or should I say, future commander of the K9 division? Jonah chuckled, taking a seat. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Captain. You're still the boss as far as I'm concerned. Addison's smile faded into something more serious. You saved my life, son. You and that dog. Don't ever forget that. Jonah swallowed hard. You saved mine first, sir. A long time ago. I'm just returning the favor. For a moment, neither spoke. Harriet wiped at her eyes again, pretending she wasn't crying. Finally, Addison reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and rested it on Jonah's. Promise me something, he said. Promise me you'll never lose that fire. That stubborn sense of right and wrong. Jonah tightened his grip. I promise. At their feet, Ranger wagged his tail softly as if sealing the oath himself. Weeks later, in a small ceremony under the autumn sky, Jonah stood at Addison's side on the steps of City Hall. Ranger sat proudly at attention, wearing a special honorary badge. The new mayor, a quiet, steady woman elected in the wake of the scandal, spoke briefly, thanking the officers who had refused to turn a blind eye. Thanking the citizens who had demanded better. thanking one dog who had refused to be silenced. When Jonah's name was called, he stepped forward, feeling the weight of every moment that had led here. The betrayal, the coffin, the gunfights, the victories, the scars. He looked out over the crowd, over Harriet's beaming face, over Bishop's tight smile, over Addison's tear-bright eyes. And he spoke. "Sometimes," Jonah said, voice carrying clear across the square, "the greatest dangers aren't the ones we see coming. They're the ones hiding in plain sight. The ones we're taught to trust." He paused, glancing down at Ranger. The dog looked up at him with steady, loyal eyes. "But sometimes," Jonah continued, "the smallest voices, the quiet instincts, the unshakable loyalty of a partner who refuses to accept what others believe, those are what save us." He straightened, heart hammering. "Captain Addison taught me that truth doesn't fear exposure. It only fears silence." The crowd erupted in applause, echoing off the marble columns of the courthouse behind him. And in that moment, Jonah knew something deeper than pride. He knew they had not just saved a man. They had saved an entire city's soul. Later that evening, as twilight blanketed Rosebridge in soft purples and golds, Jonah and Ranger walked through the quiet streets. There was still work to do. Always would be. But for now there was peace. And the unbreakable bond between a man, his captain, his dog, and a city that had dared to believe again. In the end, it wasn't brute force or political power that saved Captain Addison. It was loyalty, instinct, courage. It was a dog who refused to accept the lie everyone else believed. And a detective who chose to stand with the truth, no matter the cost. Because sometimes, the smallest voice is the one that changes everything. If you believe in loyalty, courage, and second chances, subscribe to True Echo now for more powerful true stories. Share your thoughts in the comments, and tell us, what would you have done if you were in Jonah's place? Don't forget to like and share this story. You never know who might need to hear it today.